to all of you here at Legacy Conversations. We have our old friend Jackie Thomas from Pink Ladies Organization for Missing Children back with us, and we are going to ask her a few questions. I want you to note here that I'm not a native English speaker, but we're trying to accommodate everybody. And what I also need to tell you is that this is now the end of May, beginning of June 2021. The laws may have changed since recording to the time you're listening here. So just make sure that you are up to date or contact the Pink Ladies organization. They will gladly help you. Go to their website. Jackie, perhaps we should start by you telling us what exactly you people do.
Hi, Kay. Great to be back with you again. Always enjoy these interviews and have a lot of fun doing this. With regard to the question, what do we actually do? There's quite a range. Apart from education on the sideline, we ostensibly act as a bridge between the public and this SAPS, insofar as missing children and adults are concerned. And we give direction and assistance in how to report matters, what parents or caregivers need to take to the police station along with them to report a missing person, under what circumstances a missing case should be opened or not. And we provide a lot of technology to people, including the SAPS, that they simply don't have, and we try to help streamline the process. As we've said over the years many times, we're not there to take over the job of SAPS at all. We are not opposition, and we're not in competition with them or anybody else. We're here to save lives because it's a passion that we have, a shared passion. And that is literally what we do. I spend a lot of time on the sidelines as well, speaking to parents about online cybercrime and about the grooming process when dealing with pedophiles and so on. So we have a very broad range of services. We're lucky to count amongst our members as well, our members and volunteers, psychologists, canine units, search and rescue clubs, 4x4, all kinds of people from all walks of life, including some very good counselors as well. So we always try to direct people to the right role players if we're not able to assist them in any way. And we pretty much fall in as and where we needed. Our operations are definitely not only aligned to or dedicated to missing persons. We do try and fulfill as many roles as possible that have a lot to do with the big picture. And we're happy to provide whatever service we can, absolutely free of charge to everybody.
That, you know, in my police days, we've often been called to parents, especially where there's like a civil dispute going on about the child. Many times the child's coming back home a bit late after the father had the child. I was tempted to say it because for some of these people it's an object, it's not really a human being. But that's my own personal opinion. Don't hold it against me. You know, when you're in the police or even in law, normally you work with the wrong side, you know, of society, and you do get a bit disheartened by what you see, especially with divorces, because you would think that, you know, the fact that it didn't work between you, just let it go. But I don't want to speak about divorces now. I might make another separate video on that just to give you a bit of advice from a legal viewpoint. But in the police days, we've seen often that the child is late. Now the mother calls the police, or the father, but mostly the mother. She's angry. She's still very angry. And so she says the father of the child has now actually kidnapped his own child. So I need to understand, if you can explain to us here, what would be the difference between kidnapping, like a crime, kidnapping, which is a very serious crime, and just keeping the child a bit too long, or what is known as abducting a child, like an abduction. Perhaps I didn't say that quite right. Abduction of a child by his own parent. And once you've done with that question, can I ask you also to go into what happens if one of these parents happens to be overseas and not in South Africa? What do you do?
A very interesting question that needs to be asked and that the public very often are confused by is what are the differences between a kidnapping versus an abduction, and what is parental abduction? How do these two differ? Mostly in intent, crime versus civilian matters, but there are three main differences. In terms of South African legislation, there are these three differences that I'm now going to talk about. Firstly, the victim of the crime of kidnapping can be an adult or a child. In the crime of abduction, the victim has to be an unmarried minor. That is very important to remember. Secondly, in the crime of kidnapping, the intention of the perpetrator is to infringe the freedom of movement of the victim or the parental authority of the victim's custodian. Whereas in the crime of abduction, there's an additional intention of the perpetrator to enable himself or somebody else to marry or have sexual intercourse with the unmarried minor. Thirdly, in the crime of kidnapping, there's no requirement for the actual physical removal of the victim from one place to another, whereas in the crime of abduction, physical removal of the victim from the parental authority in the parental home is an absolute requirement. Now, that may sound very confusing to your listeners, but if they were to do a little bit of research on that, they would understand the rationale behind it. It can be very confusing, especially when you get to parental abduction. And we have many people that come to us wanting to open missing child cases because their child has been taken by either a current spouse or partner or by an ex-husband or wife. Now, we've got to remember that if there's a custody, especially a shared custody order in place, a parent cannot, in terms of our law, kidnap their own child. It is then referred to as a parental abduction, but only if that parent doesn't have the right to have their child for a long period of time or to keep them away from the other parent. Obviously, this becomes very important and more serious when there is a court order in place saying that the opposing parent may not have custody of the child for whatever reason, whether it be because there's been assault or psychological damage to the child, and so on. And that is very, very, very important to distinguish. People get very frustrated with us when a spouse or an ex-spouse takes a child for a weekend and doesn't return them on the Monday or the Tuesday immediately that they should be home. And if they're a couple of hours late, unfortunately, it's something you've got to deal with. If they do contact the other spouse and say, we're not bringing the child home for whatever reason, then one has to get the children's court or the family court involved, because then essentially it becomes part of a custody dispute, and it is a civil matter. In cases like that, we are very loath to put children's faces out on the internet for reasons that we have discussed in a previous interview. And that is that you turn that child into a target. There's no need to publish a photograph of a child and say that they've been kidnapped by the other person or other partner, and to put that child in danger. At best, in a case like that, one would then put out a missing flyer for the adult partner or the spouse, because it's important that you find them. 9 times out of 10, the children are with that person and they are safe. It's just a custody dispute, and the parent is withholding custody for whatever reason. There's absolutely no reason to involve the children in that, and it is very detrimental. If the parent who has custody of a child for perhaps a holiday or a visit is overseas and declines or refuses or for whatever reason doesn't return the child on the date and time that they're supposed to, That is definitely a civilian dispute, although it can become a criminal dispute if there is a court order in place, which would put the parent who is withholding the child from custody of the other parent in contravention of a court order. In that case, one would have to look at the Hague Convention, which involves returning of children that have been taken out of the country. Many court or divorce orders for this reason do specifically state that children may not be taken across borders or into overseas territories. And that is very important. In those instances, sometimes Interpol will become involved, and that is all done through the SAPS and through the Child and Family Court. It is not a normal missing case, and we don't do a large amount of those because they can be so difficult to deal with. And in those instances, experts are brought in by the SAPS or by your family lawyer, who will advise you on best how to proceed. Obviously, if the child is in danger and it becomes an Interpol case, or the child has been taken for, let's say, perhaps a forced marriage or something to that effect, then Interpol will definitely become involved. The Hague will definitely become involved in that as well, and it may very well turn out to be a criminal case, many of which we deal with on the sidelines. But again, I stress, only if called upon to do so by the SAPS for whatever reason.
Folks, if you've been listening here up to now, you're obviously interested in this subject. And I have to ask you once again, please go and support this charity. At the end of the day, even if it's not your own child or your own mother, it is someone else's child and someone else's mother. And perhaps those people will do the same for you one day. Just go to the website, just go to the contact details and see where you can get involved. And once involved, I'm sure you will have a lot of satisfaction and pleasure from it.